You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies about New Jersey.
Hey!
Yay! We did it!
As if we haven't
I know.
done it before. But this one really, like...
This is aggressively New Jersey.
Oh, boy.
I know.
Oh, boy. Jodie.
Yep. I'm Jodie.
I'm Andrea.
And we watched Paterson.
Boy, did we.
I am so happy that you had the reaction to this movie that I thought you were going to have to this movie.
I was like, probably on Wednesday of the movie when I was like, oh no, I'm going to be obsessed with this movie.
Yeah.
And I was right.
Did you make a spreadsheet?
I did make a spreadsheet. You know what is cool about this movie, and it's something that I could apply to all of our movies, I just don't usually, is that, I think one of my skills is I think I'm a pretty good close reader in general. It's something that I like had to teach a lot, and I was in school forever because I had 3 different majors before I finally graduated. And so, but this movie, like, I was also probably at about Wednesday when I said to you, oh, the movie is a poem.
Yeah.
And so then I was able to watch the movie and just read it the way I would a poem. Mm-hmm. And it was so fun. It was so fun. It was so fun to do that with this movie.
Your research nerd just popped out.
I had all my tabs open and I had a notebook going and I had a spread. Like it was, and I don't usually rewatch our movies. Usually I only watch them once. I just don't, again, it's the ADHD part of my brain. And also, I mean, whatever.
Well, and a lot of the movies we're watching, I don't think need spreadsheets to be understood.
That's also true. But I watched it twice. Like I watched it, went to bed, got up the next day. And then as soon as I was free that day, I watched it again.
Wow. Yeah, I watched this one twice also. But that's because for me, the first time I watched it, I didn't watch it for the podcast. I just, then I realized that it would be good for this. But yeah, I watched it for a second time last night after doing an insane amount of research about it.
Yeah, and we'll get into, I'm assuming we'll get into everything. But the one thing I want to say up top real quick is this movie is it seems like pretty beloved. The reviews in general are great. I think you said, I don't remember if you said on mic or not, but you said that like one of the criticisms of this movie is that it's maybe a little twee. And I think that is maybe a fair criticism, except I don't care. And in fact, I will say now, I think that's actually part of the charm of it for me.
I agree. I think that it's kind of like, I mean, in everything that I've read Jim Jarmusch in speaking about this movie, like he doesn't care. Like this is made to have very low stakes, be very sweet, be very like mundane almost. Like I don't think he would care about that criticism at all.
Right. And again, it's another thing that makes it feel, because I'm like, why isn't that? Because I don't have the attention span in general for a movie that is mundane, where the stakes, well, this is hard because I also don't, weirdly, my least favorite part of any movie tends to be the big conflict. But I also don't have the attention span for something if like mundane but boring. But I think the fact that this movie is made like a poem, it's like some of my favorite poems are just a study of an object, you know?
Right.
Like William Carlos Williams wrote the fucking wheelbarrow, like like the red wheelbarrow.
But also I think because of, and this we're jumping right in, but because of our expectations of what a movie is and that there will be some sort of big conflict, there are so many times where that big conflict is hinted at and then never happens. And so it does kind of, the first time you watch it, it does keep you sort of like on your toes a little bit in those moments. And then even on rewatch, I felt like, oh, this is deliberate. Like it's so intentional that it feels like there should be something scary or difficult happening here. And it just turns out okay. And I think in some ways we'll definitely talk about the movie's relationship to the actual city of Paterson and how that might not be the most one-to-one relationship. But yeah, that's definitely like, it keeps the momentum going on a first watch where you're like, oh shit, this dog's gonna get stolen, or oh shit, like the bus is gonna, you know, something's gonna happen when the bus breaks down.
Explode into a fireball.
Yeah, exactly. So
totally,
you know, and that's, I think the thing that has stuck with me the most about this movie, other than just the joy of seeing a movie that's about artists who are obsessed with the mundane and the everyday, like that's could not be more my jam. Is what stuck with me is like this sort of slippery relationship with Paterson, the city. Because if you don't know Paterson, if you're not from that part of New Jersey, you don't have the frame of reference that this movie is both so Paterson that it's painful, like in a good way, and also so not. Like it's so specific and so accurate to place, and also doesn't feel like Paterson at all if you've ever been there. Like, right. And so we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. But like, that's the thing I keep coming back to, is like how much of this is almost like fantasy,
right?
You know,
and
wait, Andrea.
Yes.
What's this movie about?
Oh, it's about Paterson. Wow, that means like 10 different things in this movie. It is. I'll read to you what I shared with someone I was talking to this week. I said, Jodie picked such a good movie this week. I'm obsessed. I watched it last night. I'm watching it again tonight. It's called Paterson, a movie where Adam Driver plays a bus driver named Paterson in Paterson, New Jersey, and he's obsessed with poetry, especially William Carlos Williams, who lived in Jersey and wrote an epic poem about Paterson called Paterson. And I said he's got a smoking hot wife and a grumpy English bulldog named Marvin.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's it.
That's the movie. It is, but to get a little more granular before we get much
extremely
more
granular. Yeah.
It is 7 days plus a morning in the life of Paterson. He is a bus driver in Paterson. He was born and has lived, it seems, in Paterson all of his life, though we get a little hint that he did some time in the Marines. We see his picture in his, like, I don't know, what do you call them? They're like his
dress
his
uniform.
Like fancy dress. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually Adam Driver in that photo.
Right. Yeah.
Which is fun.
And so it's 7 days in a morning in his life. He's a bus driver. He has a wife who they have a very sweet and supportive relationship. It's like, it's kind of, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. But then it is like, I'm trying to apply like movie rules to it. And it's hard because it's like, well, in the beginning, he wakes up, he has, we can do it this way. Should I refer to my spreadsheet?
Ooh, I'm excited for the spreadsheet.
There are 10 to 12 scenes in each day, depending on what's included and what isn't. He wakes up in bed with his wife. He has breakfast. He has the same breakfast every day, it seems. He has the same walk to work. He usually writes a little bit on his bus before work. He rides his bus route. He usually stops for lunch at the Great Falls where he does some more writing. He checks in with his coworker, boss person, Donnie. Then he has a walk home. He straightens his mailbox because it is crooked every day when he gets back. One of the big reveals in the movie is how that happens.
Yep.
Then he goes home and he has dinner with his wife. Then he and Marvin take a walk to the bar where he has one beer. And usually something happens,
small,
however we define happens at the bar. And then the next day starts.
Yep.
And that happens 5 times. And then we get 2 weekend days that vary a little bit, though you can still map those days onto that routine in a way. Yep. And then the last scene of the movie is him waking up on a Monday.
Right. You know, you said like it's hard to describe this in the context of a movie plot. And I think if we tried to do that, the big conflict would be Marvin the dog eating his poetry notebook.
Which is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, and it's also a very small thing. It's like the biggest thing and the smallest thing, right? Because, you know, his poetry is the focus of his life other than his wife and his job. And, you know, he has apparently one secret notebook that the dog eats, and that's the conflict that he has to get over.
And it's funny because he has no plans to share those poems.
Nope.
And it's not, you don't get the feeling because Laura, his smoking hot wife, is so like, it seems to like sort of keep her up at night that he doesn't even have copies of it. She wants him to share these poems.
Yeah.
But I think because their life is so, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but their life is so small. When she thinks of that, what she means is like make copies of it. I guess like I get the feeling,
machine.
Yeah, and I think she imagines him like going to the bar at night and like passing copies out to his friends, like
right.
So it's not that it's like, oh, my life's work and I was just about to send it off to a publisher who, you know what I mean, and because I'm still writing by hand, I have no copies of it. It's not that. It's just.
I do think that she probably has bigger dreams for him than because she has huge dreams for herself.
She wants to be the cupcake queen of Paterson.
Yes, but also a country singer that is as big of a star as like Tammy Wynette. So, you know,
can we zero in on Lara a little bit here, or is it time?
We can. I kind of want to talk a little more about structure first,
sure, or
like about the overview of the whole thing. Only because you did such a nice job of talking about the like each day has X, Y, and Z in it. And I watched a panel with Jim Jarmusch and Adam Driver. You might have watched the same one, but
the Cannes one.
I think so. I watched a couple. I did a lot of watching. Anyway, he talked about how the movie to him is about small variations. It's about variations. And so like that pattern that you established of every day, like every day we get an overhead shot of the two of them in bed, right? Monday through Friday, it's like pretty, like it's the same time of day, all of that. But the variation is that like on Monday, they're facing each other. On Tuesday, they're facing away. I wrote this down.
So did I.
On Wednesday, he's like holding her. On Thursday, they're spooning. On Friday, he's alone in bed because she's up making cupcakes. On Saturday, she's waking him up. Like, and it's like, and one day his watch that he looks at every morning is 6:13. One day it's 6:15. One day it's 6:28. Yes, I wrote all that down as well.
So did I.
And so like, you know, it's about little variations within a form. And I think, not to get too philosophical right off the bat, but like they talk about this when discussing the movie, that it's about how living a sort of structured life in some ways leaves room for like endless creativity.
Right.
So
yeah, so much of his life is on like a sort of almost literal autopilot, and I don't think in a bad way. I think it's really lovely, you know, when he's driving the bus and he's beeping and waving at the other bus driver every day and all of that. And it's the way that they draw your attention to that in like, you know, Monday morning they wake up and Lara has the dream that they have twins, and then this movie is just like chock-a-block full twins,
lots of twins,
so many twins. And twins when you're everywhere. Watching it the first time and you don't know what this movie is, you're like, what's being signaled here? Like, is there, you know, like there is a less there's a less delicate version of this movie where you find out that like he is a vet returned who is dealing so badly with his like PTSD that he's created this like fictional internal life for himself, and those twins are a signal that this isn't reality. Right. But it is reality. And it's just that like everything else for him is so, it seems to me that everything else for him is so regimented, not even regimented, because it doesn't feel like
he's not fighting against it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah. so it allows for these pop-ups that are like atypical.
Yeah.
And I thought immediately of a teacher I had in undergrad who gave this example. I really I love to read for patterns. It's like, I think that's endlessly interesting. And he was like, it's one of those things where when you start, this isn't new, but I just always think of his example. When you start looking for things, you can't stop noticing them, right? So she mentions twins, and that's why he's noticing them. And probably there have been twins.
Streisand effect.
Is that what that's called?
Yeah.
His example was you buy a green Jeep, and then suddenly it seems like everybody has a green Jeep.
Yep. Yeah. And it's like what you were just saying about how in a different version of this movie, it would be a signal of some trauma or something like that. I feel like there's all of these things that happen in this movie that in another movie would be bigger deals, would be symbols of something else. So like the twins, the incident with Everett at the bar that turns out to be like just a Nerf gun, like the guys that pull up and ask about the dog, all of that stuff that is opportunities for conflict or drama every single time it's subverted, every single time. And so like that's kind of the tension that builds and then is released over and over and over again, and you're like waiting for something else to happen and nothing does until the dog eats his notebook. And like
Marvin's been the real threat all along.
I don't like you, Marvin.
the most intense and mean that Paterson gets in this whole movie is I don't like you, Marvin.
I know. There's so many things like that felt like they should have been bigger conflicts, like the money thing, right? When she asks for the guitar and he hesitates because it's a couple $100, doesn't turn into a thing, right? The fact that she's literally just painting random circles all over their house, like he doesn't seem to mind. The fact that like she makes dinner kind of that
tickled by he genuinely seems to delight in her. It's not even like
it's not condescending
up with or condescending. No, I think he really she's so different from him. Yeah. And I think he really loves that.
Yeah. I think maybe now is the time to talk about her, because I do think that there's like, I had a different reaction to her when I first watched it, where I was like, oh no, like manic pixie dream girl / mentally ill wife. Like, just
she's a little, I think I'm worried that I like this movie too much to be critical of it, because
I know
she is a manic pixie dream girl, but this whole movie is kind of like,
well, it's the unreality of it,
right? But not because she doesn't shake. She's not there to shake his life up. She's not there to like change him or open his, like she's there to be Laura, and he's there to be Paterson. And they're just there together being themselves in a way that is like very sweetly complimentary. Yeah. And like it is.
I think later in the movie, it gets a little better. In the beginning, I was really worried. Like she's painting random like curtains and things and like painting the walls.
And she fully has ADHD. There's like no impulse control. 100%. She's got a new habit. Like, and And I did.
The delusion of like wanting to become a country singer. And yet, like, there's all these things that then you're like, wait, but actually, because you're like, she makes all these cupcakes. He eats one time at lunch and doesn't look excited about it.
It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. But then she sells out and she like she makes, a few $100. And then also like, she wants to learn how to play the guitar, and you're like, oh God, another thing to spend money on that she's going to not be good at or whatever. And she's going to forget about it. And then she actually like has a beautiful singing voice and, learns a couple chords in the first day. She's not bad.
Yeah. Pretty impressive for one day out. Yeah. When she even says it's pretty good for never having played before. And it's not great, but she's right. It's not bad for never having played before. It's so funny after Marvin eats the notebook and she's trying to figure out how to comfort Paterson. And she says, would you like me to play the song I've been working on? And he's like, oh, no, thank
okay.
you. That's so nice. But
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, we're being led to a certain expectation, in this case of her, as this like manic pixie dream girl, like slightly maybe mentally ill, you know. But then that's subverted by the fact that like she actually does sell out of all of her cupcakes and people really like them, and she actually is kind of good at singing, and like, you know, maybe, we don't know, this is 1 week, maybe she does start to, you know, maybe she does stay with the guitar because she's good at it, and like maybe she does start a cupcake business. Like, we don't know, we're just led to feel like she's silly.
I will say something I just thought of is that, and I love her, I love Laura, and I hope that her cupcakes sold well because they were delicious, and she's going to open a business and it's going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem, our sample size of people interacting with Laura is 1.
Right.
And it seems like she is so delightful that people don't want to hurt her feelings.
Right. Yes.
She makes that secret dinner pie that
you're obsessed with.
I think it sounds delicious.
It does sound good.
So, but it appears...
What's wrong with Brussels sprouts and cheese?
Yeah. That sounds great. That sounds like a delicious quiche plus extra crust, which like...
Yeah.
I'm
it
down
sounds
for
great.
But Paterson clearly is not impressed.
No.
He's like really like gumming it down. He's having a hard time with it.
Drinking a lot of water.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's also possible that she went there and was so lovely and delightful that people just bought all. She also packed those cupcakes just loose in tins.
I know.
How was she handing them out?
I don't know. I have a friend who actually had a cupcake business, and that is not how you do it.
Can I tell you something? Don't have a cupcake business. I know that's not how you do it.
No. But I will say that charm that she has and that sort of delightful personality is how you like sell a career in entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, or how it can start, you know, like her idea of becoming a singer in some ways is almost more practical than becoming a cupcake salesperson.
The cupcake queen of Paterson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she does have that sort of like magnetic,
totally
enthusiastic charm, you know?
I do love her. I did message you jokingly. I need to be clear, jokingly, because of what I came across in my research. I was like, if I don't see her talking to somebody else at some point in this movie, I'm going to start speculating that she is in fact a ghost, as I am wont to do.
Yes, you are.
And I have no proof in this movie that she's not. But that does seem to be at least one person's actual genuine theory of this movie.
I think that
not mine.
Yeah, no. So in the interviews that I watched with Adam Driver and Jim Jarmusch about this movie, they're both very similar in their disdain for explaining things. Neither of them really wants to explain anything ever.
No.
And we'll just answer questions with like, I don't know, I never really thought about that, you know? And so I think anyone who
respect it.
I know. But like if you were one of those questioners at a panel and said to Jim Jarmusch, like, what do you think about the idea that Laura is not real? He would be like, well, she's there.
She's in the movie.
Yeah. Like, I think his whole thing with this movie is what you see is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like your brain is trying to come up with conflict, trying to come up with danger, trying to come up with all of this stuff, and it's subverted over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Same thing with her. You think that maybe she's mentally ill, maybe she's like not there, or all of these things, but she's actually just his partner, and she is all of these things.
Right.
You know? Like, she is talented at the guitar, but that may or may not go anywhere. She makes decent cupcakes. They might not be great. We don't know, you know? So I think a lot of this, in the interviews I've seen with him and with Adam Driver, anytime you try to take this movie to a place that's like, but what if? He's like, nah. No.
I love that this isn't a movie about a frustrated artist who needs a beautiful, flighty woman to break him out of his shell.
Seriously.
Like, imagine him like going to the bar one night and like he's reading his poems there finally, and he's so nervous, and she's clapping for him and wearing like a silly hat. You know?
Yes, exactly. No, it definitely could have been that. And like she is trying to get him to, like, she's encouraging of him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that she also doesn't push him too far out of his own comfort. Like she doesn't seem to have any problem with his nightly walks to the bar, his, you know, need for routine. And I mean, I did read some theories about the connection between the way he lives now and the idea of a veteran with military service. And that's something that you could read into. I think, again, if you try to take that framework too far, it can kind of take away from the rest of the movie and its like whimsy and sort of poetry in and of itself. Like you could, because there's a viewing of this movie, again, you know, like your extreme manic pixie dream girl framework that could be, this is a vet who's seen combat. He comes home. He, you know, it could be a comment on the sort of jobs that veterans have to take when they get back. It could be a comment on his need for routine for safety for himself. Like we do see little hints occasionally about the way he reacts to stressful situations. But I think that, again, that's putting like a simplistic frame over something that it doesn't fit in every situation. The scene in the bar is the most obvious moment for that. Like when he has to disarm Everett thinking that the gun is real, and you see him really shaken after that. And like, you could see that as the way, how quickly he disarmed Everett as his military training, which it probably was. You could see the shakenness of him after the fact as PTSD, as trauma. You could also see it as anyone who had to disarm someone in a bar who thought it was a real gun would be shaken. It was just not like a calm moment.
Yeah. I think it's really, I think it is the military background is the thing I had the hardest time not just letting the movie wash over me without, because I do think it is really like, it's a really obvious way of reading what's going on, that like his uniform is folded on his chair. I was thinking like before I don't remember, I could consult my spreadsheet just a second.
I mean, he wakes up without an alarm every morning.
When do you see? Yeah. So you see, I mean, the Marine photo is in the first scene. The first time you see it, it's in that first scene. He wakes up at 6:12.
And it comes back again later.
Yeah. And then the next scene, he is eating what appears to be an exact, I would bet, cup of Cheerios measured in that same little bowl. And I was like, nobody eats just a cup of Cheerios. But you know who might? So, you know,
someone who's lived a very regimented
he reminded me, that part of it, not the dreamy poetry, whatever part of it, the other part of it, the very like, you know, veteran working class, whatever, of my dad so much, who went right from the military into, he was a cop, which is, but that is also he was a cop in a very sleepy town. So it was a very mundane, routine existence where he went from one uniform to another, and he had the same haircut and the same glasses for his entire life. And he went to the same bar for his entire life. Like that part of it was, and I think that like, and actually this is a movie where I don't know it's very useful to do this, but I would bet that Paterson came home from the military and was like, what is the job that is most like my military routine, but with the least amount of conflict? Because what I don't want is conflict, but what I do still want is routine. And he was like, oh, probably a bus driver. Same route every day.
Although I will say that being a bus driver in a city, to me, seems stressful. It seems really stressful. Like, you don't know who's getting on that bus. I've had to ride the bus in Providence and in lots of other places. And like, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean,
you get a lot of like wild things happening on public transportation.
I mean, that's definitely true. But I think he seems to, what makes him different is that he does seem to delight in observing all of that.
Right.
And this is another good example of this movie, like you said, not really like being a little removed from reality, is that like, you know, even the construction workers on the bus, you're waiting for them to get vulgar and they don't. Like everybody is pretty well behaved. Even the people who are being a little loud are doing it to give a history lesson, like the Moonrise Kingdom kids. Like
no. Oh, go ahead.
Their scene is one that to me felt like, oh, maybe he's not in our reality, because I said to you, like, they're delivering these lines as if somebody planted them on this bus for Paterson to hear these lines.
Right.
Like,
yes.
There's so many, the performances.
But so do the little kids, though. The kids that are talking about Hurricane Carter.
Yeah.
Are also, they sound like they're being fed lines to give a history lesson that will feed into Paterson's knowledge of like Paterson itself and in his poetry.
And I just wonder what, I just don't imagine that it's all of the actors in this movie except for Adam Driver are bad actors. Like,
right.
So what is going on with those performances? Because there are a lot of them. Even Laura, it feels a little, like I said, like a lot of these people feel like they're delivering lines in a play to me in a way. Like, that isn't, I don't, and I weirdly, again, maybe this is just because I like this movie too much to be critical. It feels weirdly intentional to me.
It does. So I think part of what we should do here quickly is just talk about the sort of like external characters besides Laura real quick, because they do have sort of an interesting place in the life specifically of Paterson, not of Laura, but like, you know, every time he's on the bus, we get a character or couple of characters that like talk about Paterson history in some way, right? So like the first day is the kids talking about the boxer Hurricane Carter. You have this in a spreadsheet. That's probably easier. The second day is the two men, Jimmy and Lewis, talking about girls, and then the woman getting off the bus, like glaring at them. The third day
we don't get a bus
we don't get it, right? What we do get is we get Method Man.
Laura.
Night.
It's funny is we get Laura in the kitchen with him. Just to, if we're really like unpacking the patterns of this movie.
Yeah.
The first 2 days he has breakfast alone, and then the third day when we don't get the bus scene, Laura, it's very sweet. Laura gets up and comes out and gives him a kiss, and he says, "Are you awake?" And she says no and goes back to bed.
Yeah.
Like she just wanted to give him another kiss before he left, which was so sweet.
Yeah.
And then we don't get a bus scene that day. He's still working on that poem. I shouldn't say we don't get a bus scene. We see him on the bus because we do see there's two twin girls crossing the street, and they're wearing little blue glasses, and they're very cute.
Yes. Yes.
But we don't see anything happen on the bus.
Right. But then we do get Method Man in the laundromat doing his bit about Paul Laurence Dunbar. It's so good. He wrote it for the movie, obviously.
And apparently, I don't remember where I heard this. It sounds like maybe it was it sounds like from you saying that maybe it was this, maybe you know what this is from. That like also he had just, because of, I guess for the movie, had been reading William Carlos Williams himself. Like Jarmusch didn't write the "No Ideas But in Things" part into it for him. He just, remember, I thought of last week when I was like, no, you may have heard like "No Ideas But in Things," even if you haven't read Paterson. You were like, I'm not saying anything else. And then for it to come in the movie from
Method Man.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. He's also in Garden State.
Yes.
I just like that Method Man is a lot like me, in that if I could just be in every movie about Jersey, if only for a scene, I would be. We have a lot in common that way. He's also, I love how tickled everybody is by Marvin.
I know.
Because he's like, oh, is that your old human ball and chain?
Yeah. Yeah. He says like, "Hey Pugsley, what are you looking at?"
It's so sweet.
Yeah.
And even when the group of that like convertible full of gang members comes rolling by. Right before that, someone in the background is commenting on Marvin, and he says, "That is an actual creature."
Yeah.
Which is what I would say.
Yeah.
And then he says, like, Paterson asks Method Man, he's like, "Oh, is this your laboratory?" And he's like, wherever it hits me is where it's gonna be.
Yep.
Oh, what a line, Method Man.
Yep.
So good.
I know. And so then on day 4, on Thursday.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I forgot what we were doing.
Oh, that's okay. So Method Man is sort of our replacement interaction for a bus interaction. But then on day 4 is the 2 kids from Moonrise Kingdom talking about, I want to say it right, Gaetano Bresci. In the movie, they mispronounce it, apparently. They say Bresci, but they also say Italian. And so I think that apparently was intentional. The anarchist weaver that worked in Paterson. But that day also has a second interaction with the little girl, which
that scene is so sweet.
Love that scene.
It is so sweet. It is that, I mean, you already know that Paterson is a perfect human being at this point in the movie, I think, but the way this is another good example of him just being so aware. He sees this kid sitting by herself.
Yeah.
And he very, like, without making a big deal of it, is just like, "Hey, you mind if I sit with you till your mom comes back?" Because Paterson is a major city and bad things can happen. I mean, they can happen anywhere, obviously.
Right.
But, like, he's like, "I'm just going to hang out and make sure this kid's okay."
Yeah. And that's another moment where you're like, is something going to happen to the kid? Right. No. He's just going to have a conversation with her about poetry. And
also,
she's
everyone he meets is a poet.
I know. But she also has a secret notebook, you know? She reads him a poem that she wrote, which is so lovely.
Waterfalls.
Yeah. It falls like hair.
across a young girl's shoulders.
Yeah. It's a very lovely poem, apparently written by Jim Jarmusch.
Pretty good for a kid.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we find out she's also a twin.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And then
something I really like about that, too, is Paterson has poetry in his head all the time. He's always working on a poem of his own. But then when he walks home that day, he's got her poem in his head.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
And then on Friday, we don't get a bus conversation. We get the bus breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's one of those like moments where you expect something bad to happen. Nothing bad really does. But you can, I think, see a little bit of his, if you want to read into it, you can see the military training. If you don't want to read into it, you can just see somebody who's doing his job and like herding everyone away from the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but you could also read into it, you know, the idea of danger being, you know, and his role in kind of like protecting the people that are in his charge from danger.
I just want to quickly, just the way we keep talking about how this movie keeps setting up, like creating moments where tension and like foreshadowing things that don't actually come to fruition.
Right.
The scene in the bar the night before is when Doc, the old bartender's wife, comes in and you find out that he's taking her money from the cookie jar. But he asks Paterson weirdly, he's like, "Oh, you still don't have a cell phone? What about Laura? Does she have one?" And you think that, like, it seemed to me, I don't know if you think, I thought Doc was like preparing to ask him to do something. I don't know what, but he doesn't. But what it does set up is then when the bus breaks down and it's an electrical problem, so the phone's not working, you're like, oh, right, Paterson doesn't have a phone. And just last night, Doc was wondering about that.
Right. And you think that that means that because he doesn't have a phone, something bad is going to happen. But no, a kid just lends him her phone.
Right. Because everybody else has a phone.
Right. And it just works out. Like, you know, nothing bad happens. Another bus comes and gets them, apparently. We don't see that, but we know it does. And then the next thing we see is him coming out of the station manager's office and no problems at all. He just goes home, you know.
He just has a new thing to tell Laura when he gets home today.
Right. Right. We get the repetition of it could have exploded into a fireball line, which is quite funny. But then that's the night, Friday night, after the bus breaks down, where So we've seen
of the, other than Marvin's Notebook, the like three big, you know, as big as they get in this movie, things are the bus breaking down, this scene that you're about to talk about, and the Notebook, and they all happen like in quick
Friday
succession.
into Saturday. Yeah. And so Friday we have the bus breaking down, and then in the evening he goes to the bar like he usually does, and we see Everett and Marie, two characters that we've seen a few times. Everett played by William Jackson Harper.
The love of my life. He is so easy to watch. I love him so much.
I know. Anybody that watched The Good Place. Did you watch The Good Place?
Yeah, I did, yeah. Actually, it's another one of those shows. I don't know if this has come up on the show a million times because I do it all the time or not, but it's a show that I've seen every season but the last. I know.
Andrea.
I know. I love that show so much. I love it so much, and I've never watched the last season.
Oh my God.
I know.
Well, anyway.
I don't know why I do this.
We'll have that conversation another time.
I just saw him. He's also in a very strange movie called Landscape with Invisible Hand. He's in it. He's got like one scene. It's a movie that I watched because the book it's based on a book by M.T. Anderson called Landscape with Invisible Hand that I wrote about in grad school. And the book is very strange and the movie is very strange in a different way. And I don't know how strongly I recommend it for our listeners, but if you like weird little movies, I say maybe check it out. Anyway, he's in that. He's got a scene or two in that movie, and he's very watchable in that as well.
Yeah, he's great. And in this movie, he's playing Everett, who is slightly unhealthily obsessed with Marie, who's trying to break up with him over and over again. And it's like, this is one of those moments where, and I think to me, this was the moment where there was the most obvious danger. You know, it's played off as not a big deal, but he pulls in the bar a gun and says the classic line, "If I can't have you, no one will," and then threatens to kill himself. And this is when Paterson disarms him, and we find out that the gun is like a Nerf gun. But that danger felt the most real to me because it's so common.
Yeah.
Like, it's so common, like that sort of obsession, domestic violence link. You know, it was a little weird to me that was played off so calmly, but then everything else is as well. So it kind of fit. But at the same time, I was like, ugh, okay.
Yeah, I've been puzzling over that scene a lot. And it's like, the one thing is like, even when he pulls the gun, Marie doesn't seem frightened. And I think she, like, my guess is that she knows him. I want to be very careful here because cases like this often happen where people think they know somebody well enough. But it seems that for this movie, she knows Everett well enough to know that, like, I bet he wouldn't even know where to get a real gun. Right? He's an actor. We know that. They've known each other since they were kids. She probably knows that he's dramatic and acts out this way. Doesn't make it okay. It's also like in another movie or in real life, Doc maybe has a gun. Maybe has a real gun. Somebody else in the bar maybe has a real gun.
Honestly.
You know, right? Yeah. And like, and then we have a real tragedy. But that doesn't happen in this movie. It's funny. So much of this movie feels very small town in a big city. Yeah. Like, Doc knows his people so well that even he's not like, they're all just more annoyed about it. With Everett's outburst than anything else.
Yeah. And it does have that. It's interesting you say that it has like that small town feel, because like even in big cities, there are neighborhoods where like people don't leave that neighborhood. Of course. But there's a quietness in this neighborhood and like a lack of other people interacting with Paterson that feels, it lends itself to that feeling that this isn't a real place.
Yeah. It is weirdly dreamy, this movie, in a way that, again, I really like, but I could see. It's funny. I am sort of surprised by how beloved this movie is for anybody other than like me and you, because like all of this stuff I could see other people saying is very negative, you know, but this movie is like weirdly dreamy and kind of like, it feels kind of like, I keep wanting to use the word gauzy. Like there's just like a little bit of separation between the real world and this movie in a way that I do find really like soothing.
Yeah. And that's the place that I really that I have some, I don't want to say trouble because I did really love this movie, obviously, but like that stops me because I compare it in my head to the actual Paterson.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that falls apart, which we'll talk about. I don't know that we're quite there yet, but because so we talked about the Monday through Friday of like the variation being the people on the bus, his interactions with outside people, his interactions with Laura. And then we get to the weekend. And I think that's where things start to change. And we think it's going to be more dramatic than it actually is again.
Right.
But this is when we see the second shot of the photo of him as a Marine on Saturday morning when she's waking him up.
Yeah, she's up first because she's got the cupcake sale. She says it's my turn at the
farmer's market, I think.
Specifically at whatever booth at the maybe she says the bake sale booth or something like that. Which I didn't which again is very small town feeling that like you sign up for a turn at the booth. Like I don't know that that's really how it works, but fine. And he helps her pack the car. They do that thing. He specifically asks, are you going to take him with you?
Yeah.
We're like there's like a lot of attention being paid to Marvin on Saturday.
Right.
And she says, I can't, but maybe you could take him for a walk later. And he does.
Right.
Marvin has terrible leash manners.
He does. He really does.
It's like the passive, gentle nature of Paterson, where he is just like being the first time they go to the bar, Marvin drags him right past it.
Yeah. Well,
he just
and this
wants
is
to
the
sit
time
down
where,
at the falls, and Marvin doesn't want to let him.
Well, and this is so, we talk about how the whole movie is about variation. Like Friday into Saturday is where the variations start to spike a little higher and be a little more of a variation from the norm, right? So we've got the incident Friday night. She's going to the cupcake sale. Marvin takes him in the opposite direction than they usually walk, right? They still end up at the falls. Marvin doesn't want to stop. They walk past Everett on the street, who apologizes for his behavior. Oh no, that's on Sunday. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
I skipped ahead.
I was looking at I was also looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, but he goes in a different way than usual. He's writing in the basement. Laura comes home, says she's made $286.
Which I wonder. I'm being so nitpicky about poor Laura's cupcakes. Do you think? I don't think. Is that after?
Is it net or gross?
Yeah, because I
don't think she's including the cost of the flour
of all that flour.
No, I don't.
So, but good for her. She does great. I love his little basement writer's room so much.
Oh, I know.
Paterson's only flaw is that he does have a prominently displayed copy of Infinite Jest, but I'm willing to overlook that.
Well, and you get the idea that this house is probably the house that he grew up in, because it looks to me like that was maybe his father's basement or something. It's got a lot of old sort of tools and things that are next to all of his poetry books.
I did not think about that, but that is really interesting. Because they can't have lived there for too long. They're pretty young, I think. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, for that house to feel so lived in by them, like it would. Yeah. I would not be surprised. You're right. Because
he says he was born and raised in Paterson. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the house that he lived in growing up.
Well, especially if just like timeline wise, again, they're pretty. I don't actually know how old Adam Driver is, but in 2016 or whatever, he would have been. I don't think he would have been too long, maybe a few years out of the military. My assumption being that he graduated high school, went right into the Marines, did however long you have to do to, and then came home and has been.
Yeah,
so
I think we're supposed to think late 20s, maybe early 30s at the oldest, but probably late 20s.
Not long enough for that house to feel so so lived in. Interesting.
Yeah, it feels like somebody has been living there for decades and decades and decades.
I love their house so much.
It's pretty great.
Yeah,
it's pretty great. So so Saturday is the day when things kind of turn. They go out to dinner and a movie because she's made this money from the cupcake sale.
She's just, oh God, everybody is so painfully lovely in this movie. She's like, first of all, I'm gonna treat, which is just like,
I know.
It's just very sweet. And of course they see a movie that's fucking 250 years old. Like they're
in black and white.
In black and white. Like
she even says I liked it because it was black and white.
Right. This movie, if it weren't for the fact of the one cell phone we see in this movie with that little girl, like this movie could take place. When was the island of Lost Souls?
I think it was in the 30s, maybe.
This movie could be 1930. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, not really, but
he is out of time in a way.
And because
1932,
he's out of time in a way, and because he is, and this movie is so much about Paterson, like the movie itself is in many ways out of time. Like, of course, they go see some old ass movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they come home.
Oh boy.
And Marvin.
There is, when they decide to go, he's brought the notebook up because, we should say, Lara has come down to talk to him in the basement. It seems like pretty unthinkingly, just when he follows her up, he goes with the notebook.
Right.
And then unthinkingly sets it down on the sofa and they leave. And
the routine has been disrupted.
Exactly. And there is like a menace or an ominous shot of the notebook on the sofa.
Which I didn't notice the first time around, but I definitely noticed the second time.
Yeah.
And so when they get back, Marvin has shredded the poetry notebook like into a million tiny pieces,
and it does seem intentional. I said Paterson,
it does.
I forget what I said Patterson's only flaw was, but he has two, and the second one is that his dog doesn't like him very much, and I don't trust a person that dogs don't like, but
no, totally.
But I do think maybe Marvin was Lara's dog.
I think
before they got together, so it's like a territory thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's numerous times in the movie where he shows affection to Laura, and the dog like makes a grumbling noise.
Yeah,
and is like, "Excuse me."
There is an incredible painting of Marvin on the wall.
I know
that I'm sure Laura did. That it's not
so
good.
Great.
I love it so much.
Yeah,
but yeah, sorry. So, I mean, torn into snowflakes. It is. Yeah. It's like devastating.
Yeah. And she's picking up little pieces of it. She apparently gathered the whole thing.
She says, this is incredible. She says, "It's your notebook." And he says, "It's what?" Like, he can't even,
Yeah. I know. And then
his therapist would tell him it's okay to be angry sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently not, though. Mm-hmm. I did read something where it's almost... I was in one of the reviews. It was almost like Laura feels his emotions for him in some ways because she's devastated. And the last scene of that day is her trying to pick up all the pieces, and then it fades to black again. And then we wake up on Sunday morning, and our overhead shot again shows him sitting on the edge of the bed, and she's awake, and
it's
things clearly are not great.
Right? Has he even slept? Who knows?
Right. But so Sunday is sort of the end of our week, the end of the denouement of our crisis, which, the crisis being the loss of the poetry book.
Right. We see him we see him awake. She tells him to come back to bed or to go back to sleep. He says he's going to, but then we see him in the basement. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that in the basement, he goes down to the basement and he pulls a copy of early Carlos Williams poems.
Yeah.
And there's also a book of Ron Padgett poetry.
Yes.
Down there. So I like that the man who wrote the poems in this movie exists in this movie as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where we get this scene of him sitting on the chair, sitting on the couch, and Marvin's on the chair, and he says, "I don't like you, Marvin."
And then Lara just but he says, "I don't like you, Marvin," but but
he let the dog back in.
He's the one who let the dog back in.
Yeah.
Lara's like, "Didn't I put you in the garage?"
Yeah.
That you said, you read that it's like Lara feels his emotions for him. And I'm trying to let this movie just exist within the confines of the movie, but he is so reserved and so mild-mannered. And they say it's really important when you're growing up to have somebody who can not only model healthy emotions for you, but also help you identify them. Like, he did not have a parent. I mean, most of us, I would say, did not, who could say things like, oh, it seems like you're feeling really angry right now. Oh, I'll bet you're really frustrated. And I don't think he's somebody who is, I would gather, my guess is that he's somebody who's not very good at identifying his emotions, and therefore, and also, however you want to say that, isn't great at expressing them. And Lara is all feeling, right?
And if you wanted to take the PTSD angle on this movie, you could sort of see it as he's afraid to feel any of these big emotions, right? Because they can get out of control. Again, I don't know that we're being asked to do that, but you could.
He needs a feelings wheel. Would be really helpful for him.
Just point at the feeling you're having.
Exactly. Yeah. But so Lara says no, he has to go back in the garage, and I do really like that. Now that, like you saying that is her being like, somebody needs to be angry about these poems. Like, here I'm going to demonstrate to you, like, a reasonable way of responding to what Marvin is. Reasonable. I mean, not that. I mean, Marvin's a dog. He didn't have a motive, he doesn't understand. But yeah. But
also, I thought it was really sweet. She says, "I wish you would have read me some of your more recent poems. I could have remembered them." You know, because they both do have seemingly unconditional support for each other's art.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
The day before, I'm being such a jackass here, I know. But she asks him, she says, will you read that poem that I like? And of course this is just to say. Yeah. But I don't believe for a second he doesn't have that poem memorized.
Oh, of course he does. But he's holding the book, so he reads it from the book. Yeah.
Anyway.
No, it was a very sweet moment. But so this is when he goes for the walk by himself without Marvin and sees Everett. And then ends up at the falls, which are a very significant part of this movie. And sits down, and then we get our out-of-town visitor, which for those of people who don't know Paterson or aren't poetry people, this is a thing that people have done. I mean, it's a thing Jim Jarmusch did. It's how he found out about Paterson. He went to Paterson to see what inspired William Carlos Williams to write Paterson, among other things. And also the other sort of famous literary figures that have been from or have lived in Paterson, like Allen Ginsberg and things like that. So there's a out-of-town visitor who has come to see the falls.
And to see what inspired the very interesting poet William Carlos Williams.
Yeah. And they have a very sweet but stilted conversation where he asks if he's from Paterson, and he says yes. And he says, do you know William Carlos Williams? Are you too a poet of Paterson, New Jersey? And he says no. He says, I'm just a bus driver. But the guy can tell because of all the... I think he would have always said no.
Yeah. I don't think he thinks of
I think he would have always said no.
I think he might have said, I write poetry. I don't know that he would have labeled himself a poet.
Yeah. I get the feeling that he wouldn't have even said that, no matter what happened with the book. But and I think it's so meta. He says, I'm just a bus driver. And then the guy says, this could be a poem by William Carlos Williams because he's a bus driver. It's like, ugh. And then they have this conversation about Frank O'Hara and DuBuffet and the New York School of Poetry. And so the guy is like, okay, sure, you're not a poet. Like, you know all of these things.
Stuff just any rando knows about.
Yeah. I also thought it was funny. He says that he's a poet, but he only writes in Japanese, and that poetry in translation is like a shower with a raincoat on. But Ron Padgett is a known translator of poets. Like, it's a big part of his contribution to the world of poetry is translation.
Funny.
Yeah. And then he says, I leave tomorrow. Nice to meet you. Shakes hands. And he gives him a blank book to write in.
So sometimes the empty page has the most possibilities.
Yep.
And he's got 2 broken fingers. And if you've been paying attention to this movie, that unlocks everything. It doesn't.
I wanted it to mean something so badly.
I know, but this is just not to be so annoying. But poets, your biggest job as a poet, I think, is to notice details. I know that's such an obvious thing to say, but it's specificity, right? No ideas, but in things. And I think that's what all those really weirdly specific details that in any other movie would be hinting towards something bigger.
Right.
It's just Paterson, whether he will admit it or not, is a poet, and so he's watching the world that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then as he walks back, he's composing a poem in his head again. And he walks.
So much to say about that.
So then at the very end, we get the next Monday.
Yep.
And he picks up his watch, kisses her, gets up, starts his new week.
It's a beautiful note that it doesn't end on Sunday night.
I know. And I kind of almost missed that the first time I watched it. Like, it just was so matter of fact that it didn't register that it started Monday again. But when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, of course. Like, you know, he's going to continue this routine.
Right. Hopefully writing in a new, more beautiful notebook than the one.
That was a nice notebook.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Also, don't you want to live the kind of life where you could be the kind of person who carries around blank notebooks just in case you meet another poet that you can gift one to?
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say carries around a notebook. I'm like, Andrea, of course I carry around a notebook.
No.
I mean, I wish I thought you were going to say, and I wish I could be the kind of person that only has one notebook.
Yeah.
I have so many notebooks.
Oh my God.
I literally this morning had a thought to myself, because I have to start teaching again in January, that I need to buy a new notebook for my semester. Because that'll make it work. That'll make it better.
You're going to crack the code.
So what did you want to say about him composing the poem as he walks home on Sunday?
So the poem is about a song, and the song is a Bing Crosby song, "Swinging on a Star." I think everybody is familiar with that, right? And the line, you know, or would you like to be a fish, or would you rather be a fish?
Yeah,
but I actually don't have so much to say about that. But what I do, it's there's a poem. So it immediately made me think of a poem by Ezra Pound, and Ezra Pound and William Carlos Williams have an interesting relationship. But the song is from like 1944, but the Ezra Pound poem is from 1916. And it's called Salutation, and it is one of my like top 10 favorite poems of all time. And it is, I don't know that Jim, it doesn't matter whether or not he was like trying to like ask people who are aware of this poem to make this connection or not, or if he's even aware of it, though I would guess that he is, because it's if you read Pound at all, it's a pretty well-known poem.
Jarmusch did study poetry at Columbia.
Right. So so I would be unsurprised if he didn't know this poem. But do you have Paterson's poem written down by any chance? That last one?
No, I don't.
Oh, interesting. I don't think this is one of the poems that was written for the movie. Let me see.
Yeah, because one thing that, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Ron Padgett, but some of the poems, they're all by Ron Padgett except the one that the little girl says. But some of them were written for the movie and some of them were not.
And I don't think the line, I'm going to guess, I know the poem called The Poem that I told you I forgot I had actually taught once in a children's lit class, was obviously not written for the movie. Then this one, the one I'm thinking of, that last poem he reads is called The Line. And so the poem, I think he's got one called The Run. I think those probably were written.
And then Love Poem, which I think is the Matches one.
Right. So the line is, there's an old song my grandfather used to sing that has the question, or would you rather be a fish? In the same song is the same question, but with a mule and a pig. But the one I hear sometimes in my head is the fish one. Just that one line. Would you rather be a fish? As if the rest of the song didn't have to be there. And then there is, again, the Swinging on a Star song is the one he's talking about. But the Ezra Pound song, Salutation, can I share it now? Is it time?
The Ezra Pound poem, yeah.
That the line made me think of is salutation. O generation of the thoroughly smug and thoroughly uncomfortable. I have seen fishermen picnicking in the sun. I have seen them with untidy families. I have seen their smiles full of teeth and heard ungainly laughter. And I am happier than you are, and they were happier than I am, and the fish swim in the lake and do not even own clothing. And
That's great.
like, it's so fucking good.
It's
and
great.
It's, and it could be like Paterson could have written that poem. Like,
and William Carlos Williams could have written that poem about the town of Paterson.
Exactly.
Like, that reminds me of, so I did read most of the epic poem Paterson this week. And it does remind me of some of his descriptions in the first book about the people at the park that surrounds the falls in Paterson.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And so it would have been very on the nose for, because Paterson could have been like, I know a poem like that has a line, you know what I mean? Like about how fish don't own clothing. And I often think about how I could be a fish who doesn't own clothing. Like Paterson is trying to get to that level of simplicity. I don't even know if trying is the right word. I think he just is like, he is a fish with no clothing. Or
he
like
is a fish with no clothing.
Like, or at least that's him at his like, I think that's how he pictures himself.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a good place for us to talk about a little bit more about the poetry in the movie. So, like I said, Ron Padgett is a New York school poet, originally from Oklahoma, but we'll forgive him, that wrote the poems that are in this movie. And this is the same world that, William Carlos Williams was a part of, not the New York school, but you probably can explain this better than I can, actually. But there's references to Frank O'Hara, Ezra Pound. I did take notes on this part, but since I am not a poetry historian, also I thought it was interesting that Ron Padgett's poetry, his collected poems, won the Poetry Society of America's 2014 William Carlos Williams Award.
Isn't it funny how like Padgett's a big deal in the poetry world? Yeah, but like he's not somebody that if you're not, like deeply invested in the history, like you're gonna know him.
I'd never heard of him until this movie.
It is interesting how different people pop off, like because his contemporaries, so many of his direct, like John Ashbery, like he's somebody whose name you might know, even if you don't know Ron Padgett, Franco, and. Yeah, I just think that's really there's something really interesting about that to me. Yeah. And it's so I think the thing that's interesting to me about the way that poetry is used in this movie and the fact that it's specifically William Carlos Williams that's referenced over and over again is that William Carlos Williams was a doctor. He had a day job. And can I tell you where it wasn't?
It wasn't in Paterson.
So annoying.
I know.
What a weird
It's because of the poem, though. It's because of the epic poem of Paterson. But I know he was a doctor in Rutherford. And
lived in Rutherford.
It's not even the same county.
And it's such a weird, like, do you think that Jim Jarmusch didn't?
Oh, he knew.
Do you and then so like, maybe that's our hint that this doesn't actually exist in our reality. It is a very similar reality. This is a many worlds movie. And one of the hints is if you count the number of twins in the movie, there are 12. I don't know if there are 12. I don't know how many there are.
Just making it up.
Yeah. And there are also 12 scenes in every day. And then if you multiply 12 by 12, you get 144, which is how many lines are in the preface to Paterson.
Oh my God.
That's not true. I have no idea how many lines. I just think, again, this movie. Yeah. None of that. Oh, listeners, please.
But you could totally buy it.
Yeah. None of that is true. But I do think, yeah. But my point, though, is that it is a weird.
I was like, okay.
It is a weird note.
I buy it.
To fuck up.
Well, and I don't know that it's a fuck up, right? Because William Carlos Williams wrote Paterson. And so he is associated with Paterson. And the fact that he was a doctor in Rutherford instead of Paterson just seems to be completely inconsequential to anyone who talks about him.
Yeah.
Like, they just refer to him as a poet of Paterson, not Rutherford. For those who don't know,
I think you have to be
Rutherford
as obsessed with New Jersey as we are to have an issue with that.
Like,
to be like,
that's a difference.
Yeah.
But it is a difference.
Yeah.
It's about a 20-minute drive, 18 minutes.
Which in Jersey is as far away as anything.
Yes.
Is from anything.
Yes. But also, we have talked ad nauseum, you know, in a probably annoying fashion about how New Jersey is a bunch of micro neighborhoods. Like,
right.
Paterson and Rutherford are not the same thing.
Right.
They're very different. And Paterson, in and of itself, maybe this is where we talk about it, is a very specific place.
Well,
it's so specific, and it's so not Rutherford.
And you know what? Jim, you should have leaned into that, because William Carlos Williams is a man who wrote an obsessive poem about a place he did not live in.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie, like, and so you can be as familiar with and spend as much time in a place, but if you don't live there, you can't actually speak to the experience of living there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Paterson, the character in this movie,
right,
lives there.
He lives there
and was
but
born
he's
there.
being right, but he's being written by someone who didn't.
Yeah.
And maybe then, in the same way, like, you know, nobody is questioning William Carlos Williams' authenticity of how he represents Paterson and Paterson. That nobody cares about that, right? Like it, or no, I shouldn't say that. Nobody is faulting him and saying, like, you are not representing Paterson accurately because you're not from Paterson. Right. We just ignore it. And I think maybe there's a little bit of that we're doing with Jim with this movie too. Is that, like, yeah. you know?
Well, and that's what, from the very beginning, I said the one thing that jams me up a little bit about this movie is it's so specific. Like, the references, the Paterson, New Jersey references in this movie are nonstop. Mm-hmm. The people on the wall of Doc's Bar, right? Uncle Floyd, Jimmy Vivino, like Hurricane Carter.
I love that
Sam
he's got
Dave.
Both of the Vivinos. Oh, here's a cool little thing. Sorry, you said Sam and Dave. If you're counting all the twins in this movie, there are lots of twins who aren't actually twins, but are framed as twins. The two young boys on the bus the first time are, they're like seated similarly. You get the shot of both of their shoes. They have similar haircuts. They're not twins.
No.
You meet Sam and Dave. They are twins,
but
then they're also twinned with Sam and Dave, the musicians. And then also in that scene, we learn that Doc is really obsessed with chess. He's going to a chess tournament in Camden later in the week. You find out he's playing chess with himself. And so that is another kind of twin, even though it's with, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much there. Anyway, Sam and Dave.
I was just, all the references to Paterson are literally nonstop.
It is
what Sam or Dave, one of them is wearing an East Side Ghosts shirt, which I think is actually East Side High. Is their mascot is the Ghosts, I believe. I feel like that's been mentioned on New Jersey is the World.
Actually, I don't know what their mascots are, but East Side High is in Paterson. I do know that.
And isn't that the same school that Lean On Me was about?
Correct.
East Side High, Paterson. I'm gonna look it up because I hope I didn't make. Nope, it's the Ghosts. So he's actually wearing like an East Side High Ghosts shirt. There's
fascinating that their mascot is the Ghosts. Wow.
Yeah, and he's wearing that T-shirt in the movie. But so, just to put a really fine point on this, the movie is obsessed with the town of Paterson, its history, the people from it, like it's industrial. Like surface, you know, it was like not the first, but it was like the cornerstone of American industry, you know, Alexander Hamilton, like, I mean, you could go on and on and on, and all of that is
hugely
present.
Significant
Lou
historical.
Costello is referenced, like, I mean, and it does that city has an insanely rich American history, right? The New York Black Yankees of the Negro League played at Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson. It played an important part in the aircraft engine industry in World War II. Like,
And so much of that is centered on or begins because of the falls there.
The falls,
which
exactly.
Which Hamilton, I'm going to guess that everybody else knows more about this than I do because I didn't get into the Hamilton musical or anything.
We're
but
the
I
wrong
do,
two people.
Yeah, but the story goes, as far as I know, Hamilton saw the falls and thought like, oh, this will be a town of industry, and then it did become that.
Yeah,
and
it's known as Silk City because of the textile mills that were there. Also, some of the early Colt handguns were manufactured there. But so he's obsessed with all of that. The people, the history, the things that happened there, the people that came out of there. What is missing to me, and this is where I get stuck because I'm like, does it matter that it's missing? If this is more of a fantasy movie,
and is it up to me to feel the missingness of
too.
What I think you're about to say?
Yes. And so what I'm about to say, which I have complex feelings about, Paterson is a much more complicated city than it is in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It is a extremely diverse, one of the most diverse cities in the country.
Which I do think is that part is well represented.
I mean, our lead is like a white man, but everyone else is basically not.
Right. He's allowed to be, I guess.
But it's a relatively small city. It's only 8 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
And it had 52 distinct ethnic groups in 2014. It had the second largest Muslim population in the United States. It has a growing Bangladeshi American, Turkish American, Arab American, Albanian. Its Peruvian American community is among the largest outside of Peru.
Which again, you said 8 square miles?
8 square miles.
Incredible. That.
Yeah, it has an area called Little Lima, which is a Peruvian enclave in downtown Paterson. Largest enclave outside of South America. So.
God, New Jersey fucking rules.
I know. It's an extremely diverse city. It is also a troubled city in some ways. It is an underinvested in city. Mm-hmm. Its schools are notoriously falling apart.
Well, when Paterson, I just forgot his name for a second. When Paterson's bus breaks down, Lara says they should buy you a brand new bus. It's the least they can do. And then Paterson says the city of Paterson. Not likely. Yeah. So there's, this movie is a little aware of its that underinvestment that used to be.
Right. And I'm not a historian of the city of Paterson. I did grow up 2 towns over from it. And I had the typical white suburban relationship to Paterson, which is that to me it was a scary place, right? It was an ethnically diverse place. It was a poor place in comparison to the towns around it. Excuse me. But a lot of that has not changed. I was literally just in Paterson, when I was home a couple of months ago. And it is still a place of sort of poverty in the midst of extreme wealth, which is in the area surrounding it.
The case in quite a few, Jersey in particular has that.
Newark, Camden, etc. And there have been some efforts, there's been an investment in the arts in Paterson in recent years, but it's a beautiful place, and it's a place with a beautiful history and a really rich history. And that is really celebrated in this movie. Mm-hmm. And I love that because, again, it doesn't have to always focus on, it doesn't have to be lean on me. Right. And I'm glad that it isn't. But the thing that I'm a little uncertain about is it's so heavy on this place of Paterson. It is obsessed with Paterson that I'm kind of well, but you're missing a huge, you see the sort of crumbling factory buildings. You see that he lives in a relatively small house. You get the sense of the guys that drive up in the car, but that's not
there's also and it's a kind of I don't know what the adjective is, but another example of this is when he walks back from the falls over the weekend. You see the only unhoused homeless person in the movie, and he stops, and because he's Paterson, he gives him some money, and then he gives him some more money. And they share a kind word, of course, because he's Paterson.
Right.
And that's your one. And this homeless person is homeless at the falls. Like, it's beautiful. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It's very,
that's that
the
gauziness.
reality. It's so gauzy. That's the right word. And I mean, like, you know, just for a present day, like, Paterson update, like, in March of this year of 2023, there was a police shooting, and the Attorney General took over the Paterson Police Department. Like, it is still a place where people of color are, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, seemingly in danger from the police department.
At the very least. At
the very least. And also just, you know, the money that freely flows around towns in New Jersey to support their school systems does not make it to cities like Paterson.
Right. I literally, like, Lean on Me. There's a movie all about it. And well, there are a lot of things that are complicated about this, but I'm just gonna try to articulate this. Something I wish could be true is that this movie were made by somebody from Paterson.
I know.
Because then they get to decide what part of their city they show. Because I also don't know that I want Jim Jarmusch to, like, take it upon himself to represent the like, troubles of the people of Paterson.
Yeah. Yeah. But, like, from a statistical perspective, I did do some research because, again, we are two white ladies from the suburbs of New Jersey, you know, or at least I am. You're from chicken country, but
and also I was born in the suburbs. I moved to chicken country.
I just like talking about your chickens and your raccoons. But
Raccoon.
In 1983, Paterson was the 5th poorest city in the United States. So, like, this is not just like, oh, it's a rundown neighborhood. Like, Paterson has had some real trouble in city management, in funding, in investing in schools, investing in neighborhoods.
What's to be said for Paterson himself being so particular about his routine? Like, has he maybe built a life for himself that elides all of that because he needs peace? And although, can you live in a city and make that decision for yourself? I don't know think that you can.
I mean, like, again, I'm speaking from somebody who did not grow up in Paterson, but, like, I have been there many times. I don't know a part of Paterson that is that quiet.
Right.
Maybe there is. I freely admit that I do not have all of the knowledge in the world about this.
But if you don't, Jim Jarmusch certainly doesn't either.
I mean, I did grow up, I grew up 2 towns away. Like, the town in between my town and Paterson is Fairlawn. And it's like,
well, and this is to draw a parallel to say, like, to draw a parallel. I lived before I moved to Philly 2 years ago. I lived in Collingswood, which is a town over from Camden, and Camden, Newark, and Paterson are often held up as, like, 3 kind of sister cities that do have long, rich history in New Jersey, have a lot to do with, you know, have a lot to do with the history of like what makes Jersey, right? And have had huge contributions to the culture of New Jersey through the people that have come from there, you know, and are completely underserved and ignored. And Camden has had some, like, I put scare quotes around, like, revitalization efforts that still manage to not actually serve the people of Camden. And that's not all true. There are other, whatever, Camden, again, I'm saying all of this because I also grew up or lived next to a town that has a similar, and wouldn't dream to be able to speak for the people of it, which obviously you're also not trying to do. And and I hope that Jim Jarmusch is also not trying to do. Right. What makes me feel okay about it is, like, actually this movie isn't about Paterson the place, it's about Paterson the poem. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that even with that take, though, as someone who read Paterson the poem just recently, there is much more engagement with the history of the area in that poem. Because William Carlos Williams, like you, and unlike Jim Jarmusch, lived a town or two over.
Right. And in that poem, he talks about the indigenous tribes of that area, and he talks about the interrelationship between those groups of people and settlers and like all of this stuff. And obviously Jim Jarmusch is not trying to do that with this movie, right? And I don't think that, like you said, like, do we want to see him try to reckon with the political and economic devastation of a city based on white flight and all sorts of other things? Probably not. Like, he's probably not the right person to do that. I did desperately try to find a review of this movie from someone from Paterson. I could not. I looked for a Star Ledger review, thinking maybe that would be something, or a Bergen Record review.
Interesting.
Could not find it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I was not able to. I did find a review from someone who lived in Paterson for a time, but I don't know if that's the same thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, Jim Jarmusch describes his interest in this story as, what happened was I went to Paterson over 20 years ago as a day trip because I was interested in William Carlos Williams and the fact that Allen Ginsberg grew up there. So he's interested in the history, mythology, romanticized version of the city, right?
Which I think is also okay. Like, yeah, I think that is, and what I like,
he does. Okay, wait. Let me quote this real quick because this is exactly what we're talking about. This is from an article in NorthJersey.com. He does say a lot of the architecture is from the same period. He's talking about Yonkers, which is where some of this is filmed. He said, Paterson, the film, is not a social document. It's not hyper-realistic. Our film is partly an imagined Paterson, but with a real affection and intention to feel the real Paterson. And I think that is what we're saying. Right. It's about something that you don't often see, people who are content more or less with the kind of limited lives most of us have because their inner lives are full. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's judgmental of us to watch a movie like Paterson. I'm getting away from the larger implications and kind of narrowing back in on Paterson, the character. It's sort of judgmental of us and bringing a lot of like preconceived ideas of people who live quote unquote smaller lives like that to be watching this movie and waiting for something like extraordinary to happen to Paterson, the character.
Yeah. And that's part of watching a movie, to be fair to us. Yeah. But also, like, I do think that as two people from New Jersey who are probably more familiar with the city of Paterson than a lot of viewers of this film, I think we are looking for things that aren't going to be there because of that. And that is taking our own preconceived notions and kind of laying them on top of a very specific story.
Right. And I like what he says about was the word unreality? What was the word he used?
It's not hyper-realistic. It's not a social document. It's partly an imagined Paterson, but with a real affection and intention to feel the real Paterson.
There we go. Okay. I really like that. And that does kind of explain also the parts of the movie that feel they're not, but sort of almost invite you to read them as supernatural, like the overabundance, the seemingly overabundance of twins and that kind of thing.
Well, and so I think I sent you this quote last night, but there's another article from The Guardian that says, this is a real place with real landmarks, yet Jarmusch can't help reconfiguring it into one of the unreal ghost town sites of his imagination. Paterson will walk streets that are weirdly uninhabited except for sudden startling cameo apparitions, which is how it feels when he's walking around the streets.
Right. And it's how a poem works too. Paterson, the poem, again, it's an epic poem. It's like hundreds of pages long. And it is robust and it is like various, and there are different ways that poems are written. It's not just like one long poem of the same form, page after page. So what I'm about to say is a little bit against that, but it's like, but in a poem, there's only so much you can represent, even if what you're representing does feel pretty, again, robust and almost exhaustive in the way that, but
and that's what William Carlos Williams was trying to do, but that maybe isn't what Jim Jarmusch is trying to do. Right.
Yeah. And William Carlos Williams was trying to do it, and it's a great poem, but there's still, you can't in a poem or in a movie represent the entirety of a place. Like you just can't.
Right.
And I think that, and also hundreds of pages of poems versus how many minutes is this movie?
I think it's like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't compete there either.
Well, and also I think, and forgive me for bringing phenomenology into this conversation, but
phenomenon.
Oh
Anyway,
God,
that's just
came out of your brain.
That's from an undergrad professor I had talking about phenomenology, and that was like, you just Manchurian candidate activated that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
there was no intention behind that. That just,
yeah.
Holy moly. Anyway, I'm so sorry.
No, that was wonderful. But, and I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion of phenomenology. I really, really don't. But,
Okay. Well,
you know,
okay.
I know maybe you do. But if we're talking about a movie that is sort of in the world of imagism, which is, you know, the type of descriptive poetry that William Carlos Williams, getting exhausted saying that name again, was a part of.
Stephen Wallace Stevens.
Yeah, Stephen Wallace Stevens. And then also engaging with the ideas in phenomenology, which is, you know, a philosophy that begins with lived experience. Mm-hmm. His lived experience has to be quiet enough, in our view, to notice the things he's noticing.
Right.
I think that if he was writing this kind of poetry, but his world was loud and chaotic and busy, it wouldn't make sense. Like, because he's writing from observation.
Preach. Preach, my friend. It is,
yeah.
Again, when, like, it's funny. Paterson, the poem, is not a great example of this because it is so sprawling and so engaged and is doing so many things at once.
Yeah.
But his other more famous poems, kind of because they are snappier and smaller, like This Is Just to Say, like The Red Wheelbarrow, that ask you to just look at an image, a moment, an object, and just let it be and exist, and to pull the meaning from the thing as it exists on its own, and not to look at it as a metaphor for something else. And it is so sneaky of Jarmusch to say, like, that's what's happening here, but also look at all these twins, and look at this strange man who shows up out of nowhere with 2 broken fingers. And isn't it interesting that Laura is so obsessed with black and white, and she wants to fill the world with black and white. It's so sneaky.
And repeating patterns. Like, she's obsessed with patterns.
And I think it's a challenge to put all of that in there and then say, like, but it just is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's sneaky.
He's throwing in so many, he's throwing in references to Emily Dickinson, like, you know, all these different poets, Frank O'Hara. Like, he's asking us to pick it apart and then being like, why are you picking it apart?
Like, which is also, it's a very William Carlos Williams thing too. It's a very, like, Imagist thing to do also. Oh boy, my brain is doing 12 things at once. We started talking about and abandoned it. That scene with the Japanese poet, he says, I'm driver. Paterson says, I'm a bus driver. Driver says, I'm a Paterson. Also true. And he says, aha. And that aha is like, no, really? Well, William Carlos Williams was a doctor. And Wallace Stevens. This lady's got me stressed.
I know.
We watched that. I just real quick in that Cannes panel, this poor woman. I get it. This is why you don't ask a question at a panel ever.
Yeah.
She's
embarrass yourself.
She has clearly done. My guess is she's somebody who doesn't have a ton of background in poetry, and did something, and probably did a ton of research to get ready very quickly, and made my favorite blunder of all time that somebody could have made is so funny. She tries to say William Carlos Williams and says Stephen Wallace Stevens, which is it's such a beautiful slip. I genuinely, I'm not laughing at her.
No,
I think it's so sweet and funny.
Easily do that.
Oh my God.
There was a Wallace Stevens book on the desk in the basement.
Right, because Wallace Stevens was, I think, an insurance salesman from, is it Hartford? This is something I should know and would have been able to confidently say five or 10 years ago. But so, you know, Paterson, the character, comes from a rich history of people working their like quote unquote mundane everyday jobs and having this rich interior life of poetry. And Wallace Stevens is one of them. And I think because this movie isn't just about William Carlos Williams, it's not just about Paterson, right? It's about the rich history of poetry. I think it is also the thing why I'm saying all of that is this movie also feels like Wallace Stevens' poem, The 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, which is one that if you took a poetry class in undergrad, you probably would have encountered. It's a 13 stanza poem, and each stanza is, again, one way of looking at a blackbird. And this movie could be called like 7 Ways of Looking at Paterson, right? It's the same. His routine is so specific, and every day you're looking at this same exact, basically, you know, we can, and I did zero in on all the different variations, but for the most part there are 10 to 12 parts of Paterson's day, and you can focus on one and hold it up like a little snow globe, right? And kind of turn it and say like, oh, isn't that interesting? But at the end of the day, it's a day in the life of Paterson. And I think that's just something else I was thinking of while I was watching this movie. And it does make it a little easier to, and maybe this is lazy of me as a watcher because I liked it so much, but it does make it easier to just sit back and be like, let's just let this movie be.
I know. And in the spirit of not letting it be, there's one other thing that, again, I don't know if it matters.
Oh, Wallace Stevens also said, let be finale of Seam. It's in The Emperor of Ice Cream. And that is another thing that, like, this movie is also, it's just like, stop trying to see what it seems like is happening in this movie.
Right.
Like, just let what this movie is being, just let it be that.
Right. And yet, the other thing that kind of sticks with me in a weird way with this movie, and again, I don't know that this matters, but it's something that I can't not think about, is the fact that this is a very optimistic movie.
Before you get into that, can you say more about, like, I'm not disagreeing with you, but what feels optimistic specifically in this movie?
So I think what feels optimistic specifically about this movie is that, and maybe optimistic isn't the right word, but that he lives a very working class life, right? There's a moment where she wants to buy a guitar and you can see the financial strain could be there, but we don't really get into it. He lives in an economically relatively depressed city. So to me, the optimism is maybe more that the sort of the ways that reality wears you down as a working person under capitalism is not really shown in this movie. So that his job as a bus driver is uneventful, relatively easy, not too much of a strain, so that he can also be a poet in his head. Like, as someone who has worked in shit retail jobs and other jobs that are menial jobs, they often don't pay a living wage. You often have a second job. You often have trouble paying your bills. And like, you know, there's all of this stuff that could have to do with his now I'm really going to get obnoxious about this. His privilege as a white man that maybe inherited that house. But in the same thing that we've been talking about with the way that Jim Jarmusch is basically like, well, don't think about these other things. I think he's saying to us, don't think about the reality of life as a bus driver.
Right.
Like, that is, we're looking at the mythical bus driver. We're looking at the poet bus driver. We're not looking at the actual daily life of an actual bus driver, because, and all this to say, This is just to say, I do in some ways subscribe to the idea of, as an artist, having a day job that doesn't take brain power in the same way that being creative does. Like, it takes brain power, but it doesn't take the same kind of creativity that it takes to write a poem. Right. I do think that there's lots of people, William Carlos Williams included, who, well, that took a different kind of brain power, but a lot of it to be a doctor, worked a quote unquote day job that allowed them the mental freedom to do their creative work.
Right.
As someone who has tried to do that from a less privileged, but still more privileged than most position, it's not quite that simple.
Right. Right.
Like, working a day job that is menial often means it's underpaid, often means that you leave the end of the day so tired that it is hard to do your creative work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that Jim Jarmusch is asking us to not think about any of that and just think of this as like a little, like you said, snow globe almost.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard for me to escape the all of the things that aren't in this movie.
Right.
You know, because of who the main character is,
Mm-hmm.
because of what Jim Jarmusch wants us to focus on and not focus on. Like, I do imagine, like, what if this movie was about a Black woman bus driver?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of Black women bus drivers. Yep. There's a lot of, you know, Latino men bus drivers. There's lots of people that are not a tall, handsome white man that looks like, you know.
Well, hold on.
Well, handsome in a weird way.
Can we, real quick, what is that line? Do you have that Guardian article pulled up by any chance? I'll pull it up real quick if not. Oh, I did find, I'm looking for the article, but I just found, so there's an article that describes Adam Driver, and that's what I'm talking about right now in a way that I absolutely love. And I was just getting ready to pull that up. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's in one of the Guardian articles I think that we've already referenced.
It's the one by Peter Bradshaw. Yeah.
In looking it up, I found a Twitter post of somebody, Renegade Apostle, choose your fighter, weird descriptions of Adam Driver. Gordian knot of clenched intensity. I'm going to read these out of order because I'm going to save the one I was looking for the end. The actor who seems to seethe with his entire being. Tremulous. His mouth seems on the point of trembling with tears. But then the one I was looking for, which I love so much, is an Easter Island statue reborn as a delicate, sensitive boy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Do you know how many times in my notes I wrote in all caps his face?
Yeah.
When he looks at Lara with love, it is like hard to look at. He is so overcome with emotion in such a quiet, which is so funny because I think when you hear Adam Driver now, you think of that meme of him from, oh God, what's
Girls?
the movie where it's him freaking out and he like turns and punches a wall.
Oh, Marriage Story.
Marriage Story, yeah.
You
think of that meme from Marriage Story where he's so overcome with emotion that he explodes. Yeah. And in this movie, though, like the only time you really see him in a way overcome with emotion, it is with love for Lara. Mm-hmm. And you just see it take over his face. He's teeming with it, but in a way that is still contained.
Well, and he has a very expressive listening face.
He really does.
Like when asked about this role, he talks about trusting that thought is interesting enough, which I thought was really, really beautiful.
Yeah. And in this movie, it is like you could just watch him listen and react to the people around him. You see it so much on the bus. The scene where he's like kind of like delighting in the construction workers being kind of bumbling. Yeah. And then he reacts to the girl getting off the bus, reacting to them less positively. Like it's all I've never disagreed with anybody about Adam Driver. I've also never really watched him closely in anything. But
you were not a girls person?
No. But he is tremendous to watch in this movie. He's like, it's impossible to. I was like, I get the Driver girls out there. Like, it is impossible not to love him.
Yeah, and it's such a quiet performance that I feel like it's one of those where it's easy to kind of easy to not recognize how much skill that takes because it's so quiet and so understated. But like, he's got to hold that whole movie with his face,
and he does.
Yeah.
That's I think our listeners have heard me complain. I want every movie to be 80 minutes at this point. Yeah. And I know that's my fault. And I wasn't always that way. No, but I said to you, I would watch 5. They could go through 12 weeks in his life and I would watch, and it could be the same thing with a variation with a difference, or repetition with a difference every day. And I would be thrilled.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. There's just something like, especially
I didn't interrupt the actual point you were trying to make because you called him handsome.
I think my point was just that it's not that I am upset that this movie is missing those other bits of reality, but maybe that I would also like to see someone create a movie like this that was centered on someone different or had more realism to it. I don't know that would make a better movie. I don't, but I
it's
think
so
that,
hard because
yeah, I don't know. I just, it pointed out, as in all of its beauty and simplicity, it also pointed out for me what wasn't there. And I kind of was curious about what that would look like if it was.
It is so hard because I agree with you so much. And then also I'm like, maybe are we a little like...
Well, I think I get it. I mean, we are like, two white ladies talking about this movie being like, what if this was more diverse? Like, I get what I sound like. I know. I'm aware of my status as the well-meaning white lady, but I do think that there are plenty of super talented people in other communities. Not Jim Jarmusch making a movie that is a different angle on this, but someone else.
Right. And I think now I'm just reckoning with my own bullshit, because we also have the other like Jersey movies we've watched are fucking Garden State and Patty Cakes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's because these are the three that have sort of risen, not risen to the top, have like gotten a sort of spotlight on them. And I think the most like quote unquote, big scare quotes, authentic experience we have would be Jeremy Jasper, because he's from the area he's writing about. Zach Braff is also from the area he's writing about, but I think came from a place of much more privilege and is also representing a weird kind of dreamy reality.
Yeah. And I can't speak for Jeremy Jasper because he hasn't come on our podcast.
Jeremy Jasper come on our podcast.
But I will say that the town that he is from is a little nicer than what's been represented in like the Lodi Paramus area in that movie.
So it does say a lot that we don't have. I can't think of too many examples.
Yeah.
It's not that we're not watching these movies because we're ignoring them. I just don't know too many. And I'm sure there are people who are really trying to get or maybe have made these movies and we just don't know about them because of the spaces we occupy. So maybe that's something you and I off mic should be looking into.
But all that to say, like, in some ways what makes this movie work so well, which is its simplicity and its like very, very, very narrow focus and its aversion to conflict, is also then pointing out that those things are not always bad to include and are missing from this. So it's like, I'm not complaining about this movie. I was delighted by it. I could watch it again.
It is an argument I make, or it's an argument I used to... It is the button I used to put on conversations like this, specifically when I taught children's lit. My students were almost always pre-service early education teachers. So they were students who were going to be choosing the types of books that were going to get in front of young children. And in the towns most of them were from, they were going to be kids who a lot of them looked a lot like the teachers themselves, like young white kids in the burbs, right? And so the conversation we would have a lot is like, how do you can't ask one book, you can't ask one piece of art to speak for the whole of a population. Right. And it's why we need hashtag why we need diverse books. It's hashtag why we need diverse movies. Right. And it's why we also need a diversity of books and a diversity of movies. Right.
Because I'm basically like, this movie is great as is, but what if it had all these other perspectives? But of course it doesn't, because it is made by one person and it is one movie, right? So I think the only reason that I feel this way so actively with this movie is because I am more familiar with the places that they're talking about.
Well, and it's also called Paterson, and the main character is named Paterson. And it's about a poem about Paterson. So to ask this movie to speak for Paterson, I think is a little more reasonable than to ask Patty Cakes to speak for
Lodi.
It's not called Lodi. Her name is not Lodi.
Right. No, that's a solid point. That's a solid point. Yeah. And I think I just have like, I have the belated love for Paterson of someone who grew up so close to it, had a very sort of biased, racist, really, experience of living near that city, and has realized later in life that A, that I had that experience, and B, that Paterson has so much beauty and so much history, and like is a place that like New Jersey should be proud of, so some of it is maybe, I don't know, white guilt, being like, man, I had this view of this place, and I was only seeing it through one very, very narrow perspective, and this movie is also seeing it through one very, very narrow perspective. So
right.
Yeah. Welcome to The Watchers, where we talk about my guilt of being a well-meaning white lady.
There's one more thing I wanted to say, and I don't know if this gets dropped in somewhere else or if it just gets cut because it doesn't really matter, but it was something I was thinking about a lot, and it sort of, in a way, is in conversation with the like Imagist movement, which this movie is also in conversation with. And it's the thing with I keep going back to the twins because they are the most anomalous thing in this movie.
Yeah. And
then also this like how quote unquote real is Paterson the character's experience. And it's like I had a philosophy professor in undergrad, actually at the community college I went to before I transferred to Rowan, where I shout out to community colleges where I got some of the best, like most of what I have learned about poetry, know about poetry, comes from my mentor that I met at community college, who like encouraged me to go on to undergrad and to grad school. So a lot of what I've talked about in this episode doesn't even come from my like grad school education or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I say all that because I had a different instructor who in a philosophy class, and I don't remember the context for it, but him saying like, when we say like, what are the odds, what are the odds that Paterson is going to see 15 twins, I don't know how many it is, over the course of 7 days. And it's like, well, you're like, to put yourself, because you're watching a movie and it is kind of like instinctual to put yourself in the protagonist's shoes, right? So like, what are the odds that I would see this many twins in a week? And it's like, probably not great that you would, but what are the odds that someone in all of history across this great planet would?
Right.
Pretty good that one person at one point would have this particular experience.
Especially someone who has a job where they encounter hundreds of strangers a day.
Exactly. Yeah. And so those kinds of things of like the unreality of this movie is maybe just because you're like, well, this isn't my experience, but surely it's somebody's experience at some point. And Jim Jarmusch, one day I'll get through his name without, I just try and like run into it full force with confidence. Jim Jarmusch, has chosen to represent and to show us this one person's unique experience. And I think that's fine. I think that's okay.
No, totally. I think that's right. I also think this movie has now made me want to see a movie on Gaetano Bresci and on Lambert Castle, the silk strikes of 1913. Like, there's just Hamilton's great, fine, whatever. But Paterson also has a million other really super interesting stories, that a lot of them about immigration and about labor rights.
I kept thinking about Paterson's character in a movie where all of this is happening in his head. And what actually is happening is he's sitting in front of a computer with a million Wikipedia tabs open.
So he's you.
And what we're actually watching is the poem that Paterson, the vet who has returned from war, it is like, maybe is like agoraphobic or something. Did you watch Roseanne?
Yeah.
Do you know how Roseanne ends? Before, I know Roseanne is canceled, and that but also that the show came back and wasn't good and ignored all of this. But the way the original series ends is there's an episode where Dan has a heart attack and recovers. Yeah. Okay. But you find out at the end of the series that Dan actually died, and everything you're watching
that's right.
is Roseanne rewriting her own history.
That's right. I do remember that now. Yeah.
What we should do, you know what would be fun, is to do an episode of like the most fucked up, because I think we've talked about dinosaurs because I had a crush on Robbie. Can I say something without people getting mad?
Yeah.
But that ends with the like imminent extinction of the dinosaurs, and you have grown to love this family over the course of the show. Anyway, speaking of a million Wikipedia tabs open, what was the actual point? There's so many little like mini info dumps in this movie, which does I know we've been talking for 2 hours. We're back to the good old days.
Yeah.
Which does sort of mirror Paterson the poem too. Sort of feels that way. Like,
yeah. Oh, it does.
It's like here's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and the movie. I think the bus is a really clever way to mimic that, because Paterson himself does live a small life, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have access to all of these other experiences.
Yeah, I think it's a it's a good vehicle.
Hey-o!
It's a good vehicle for the story.
You ever drive one of those accordion buses?
Articulated?
Just the way he says articulated, and then he says it. Oh God, he is so charming.
Yeah,
Jesus.
that scene with the young female poet is one of my favorite parts of the whole movie. She's so charming too.
She's great. Yeah. Is she a bus driver who likes Emily Dickinson? I think that she's tickled by, or who likes poetry. I forget, but
yeah.
Emily, and God, I could do this all day. I'm so sorry. But of course, like Adam Driver, the poet, Paterson, the poet, living a small life with these poems that he's keeping to himself, and then just to like, you have to mention Emily Dickinson there, like, and she is somebody who had a much more complicated life, we know now, than she is often painted as having.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting too.
I just pulled up the actual poem Paterson for a second. I just feel like Jim Jarmusch kind of stole the idea for Paterson from this poem.
Yeah.
So this is in the preface, or in book one, I can't remember. But this is what you were talking about. Say it, no ideas, but in things. Mr. Paterson has gone away to rest and write. Inside the bus, one sees his thoughts sitting and standing, his thoughts alight and scatter. Who are these people? How complex the mathematic among whom I see myself in the regularly ordered plate glass of his thoughts, glimmering before shoes and bicycles.
God.
Like, that's this movie.
I mean, God, it's so good. We could have done a version of this episode that would have been exciting for nobody, but where we just like pointed out the specific parallels between the poem and the movie.
I would need another week or two to really get into the poem for that to work. That's
for the Patreon when we have 1 million downloads.
Yeah.
We'll do our Paterson deep dive, and I'll finally get that book club poem, that book club podcast I've been itching for going.
Yeah. Starting with an epic poem from the, when was this written? 1950s? 50s and early 60s. All right. So should we pivot to our December plan? Because this is the end of our November episodes. Yeah. So next month we've decided, and we've mentioned this before, that December is going to be our present to ourselves. We're going to watch the movies that we've both seen and love that we had put off of our list because, the original conceit was introducing each other to our movies. But these are movies that came up in our initial conversations of like, could we do this movie? This is one of my favorites. Nope. This is also one of my favorites. So we're going to do those movies. What are we starting with?
So again, these are movies we both love. So it's sort of like arbitrary as to whose movie is what. But I'm going to take the lead on this one, which means you'll next week get to tell us what it's about, et cetera, et cetera. We're watching a movie that I love so much. I know you do as well.
I could recite this whole movie.
I think this is a pretty good... Neither of these actors are in this movie, but I do think it's a pretty good midpoint between the Molly Ringwald John Candy spectrum.
Yeah, I agree.
We're revisiting an actor that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, Val Kilmer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I need so much lead up.
I know.
We're watching Real Genius. I'm so excited.
It's such an epic movie in my mind. Like, I had it on VHS. I think I taped it off of the TV or something. And I just would rewind and rewatch that movie constantly. Yeah. Huge crush on Val Kilmer in this movie.
He's perfect in this movie. He's so good. Everybody's great in this movie.
I mean, secret science chamber that you get to through a closet. How is that? That can't be bad.
There's so...
Turning the hall into ice. It's the best.
Movie really did color what I thought college would be like, though, I will say.
Seriously. In a way that led to nothing but disappointment in my life. There were no ice luges in the hallways. Sadly. Yeah. It's going to get silly again.
We're going to get silly, and
maybe we'll find a way to bring poetry into it anyway.
It's such an 80s movie, too.
Yeah.
Just the, like, I'm just assuming everybody's seen it, maybe not. So I actually won't say too much, but it is... I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to talk about this movie.
Yeah. There will definitely be misogyny, boob jokes, possibly some homophobic shit, possibly some racist shit. It's from 1985. We will acknowledge that that's probably going to be there before we watch it.
But all of that to say, it is a delightful, wonderful movie that just is so much like... It is one of those movies where it's like, I think that movie is so funny, and it's because like that movie has so much to do with what my sense of humor looks like today.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. I quoted that movie like to a super annoying degree most of my young life.
Next week is going to be one of those weeks. And there's going to be both two of us. Usually,
usually
there's only one of us.
I know.
Where can folks watch it?
Let's see. Great question.
Yeah, it looks like it's available to rent Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, Vudu for a few bucks. It's well worth your few bucks because it is so fun and good. You can find us at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram. You can email us. We're WatchersPodNJ@gmail.com. Leave us a review, please, if you feel so inclined. And tell your friends about us.
They can find me on Instagram at Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM. It is my art account. So if you like art, go there.
It's a great art account. I'm at AQ Andrea Q. It's my pictures of cats and dogs account.
Yes. And now mine has a cat on it as well because I'm watching my mom's cat. So
she's so beautiful. I love her.
Anyway,
we will see you in space.
We'll see you in space.
Kind of.
Kind of.
We'll see you in the lab.
Yes, we'll see you in the lab.